There is a particular kind of pain that comes from investing in a relationship that turned out not to be what it appeared to be. Not the clean pain of an obvious betrayal that is easy to identify and easy to name, but the slow, confusing pain of a relationship that felt genuine and meaningful and real, only to reveal itself over time as something very different. A friendship that was about what you could offer rather than who you are. A connection that was built on performance and convenience rather than on genuine love and loyalty. A person who presented one version of themselves while living another. And you, trusting and open and willing to believe the best, walked deeper into it than you ever should have, before you finally began to see what was actually there. If you have known that experience, or if you are in the middle of it right now, I want you to know something before we go any further. You are not foolish for having trusted. You are not naive for having hoped. The capacity to give genuine trust and genuine love is not a weakness. It is one of the most beautiful things about a person who has been shaped by the heart of God. But God does not want His people to remain indefinitely in relationships that are built on deception. And He does not leave us without warning. Throughout the entire Scripture, God gives His people specific, clear, recognizable signals that something in a relationship is not right. And when those signals are present, He calls us to pay attention, not to become suspicious of everyone, but to be discerning, to see clearly, and to respond wisely. Today we are going to look at 7 warnings that God gives in His Word for the person who may be in a false connection. Not every difficult relationship is a false one. Not every person who has hurt you is someone God is calling you to release. But some relationships have a specific character that the Bible identifies clearly, and the person who learns to recognize that character is the person who can protect the very precious thing that false connections are designed to drain: their trust, their faith, their peace, their calling, and their walk with God. Before we look at the specific warnings, I want to establish the biblical framework for why false connections are a concern that God takes seriously. Proverbs 4 verse 23 says, "Keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life." Keep your heart with all diligence. That word keep carries the idea of guarding, protecting, maintaining a vigilant watch over something that is precious and vulnerable. And the reason God calls us to guard the heart is that the relationships we allow into the deepest places of our lives are among the most powerful forces that shape it. The person who has unchecked access to your heart has a profound influence over your thinking, your choices, your spiritual temperature, and your sense of who you are. And when that person does not have your genuine good at heart, the damage that access can do is significant. 1 Corinthians 15 verse 33 says, "Be not deceived. Evil communications corrupt good manners." Be not deceived. That phrase assumes that deception is possible, that relationships can look better than they are, that what presents itself as good company can be corrupting the good character of the person who receives it, without that person fully recognizing what is happening. God is not being paranoid when He warns us about this. He is being realistic about the world we live in and the nature of human relationships in a fallen world. Not every person who enters your life carries good intentions, and not every connection that feels meaningful is meaningful in the way you think it is. The first warning God gives is that a person whose words and actions are consistently inconsistent should not be trusted with your deepest loyalties. The person who says one thing and does another, who makes promises and breaks them with little apparent awareness or concern, who presents a version of themselves in public that is different from the version that appears in private. This inconsistency is not simply a character flaw to be patient with. When it is consistent and persistent, it is a warning signal about the foundation on which any relationship with this person is being built. Jesus described this pattern with unmistakable clarity in Matthew 7, verse 16. "Ye shall know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes of thorns, or figs of thistles? You shall know them by their fruits, not by their words, not by their intentions as they describe them, not by the impression they create, by their fruits." the actual outcomes of who they are, the actual pattern of how they behave over time, in different circumstances, under pressure, when no one is watching, when it costs them something. That is what reveals what a tree actually is. And a tree that consistently produces a different fruit than the one it claims to be is telling you something important about its actual nature. In a relationship, this warning looks like this. The person who repeatedly says they care about you, but whose behavior consistently says otherwise. The friend who is supportive in public, but undermining in private. The one who speaks of loyalty, and then acts in ways that serve only themselves. Do not be distracted by the words. Watch the fruit. Over time, consistently, and let the fruit be the most reliable evidence you have about what the relationship actually is. The second warning is that a person who consistently draws you away from God, from His Word, from your church community, or from the values you hold before Him, is not a connection sent by God. This is one of the clearest and most urgent warnings in all of Scripture about false relationships. Because one of the primary ways that harmful connections do their damage is not through obvious wickedness. It is through the slow erosion of what matters most. The subtle pressure to compromise here and adjust there. The conversations that consistently leave your spiritual temperature lower than it was before. The relationship that makes you feel that your faith is slightly embarrassing, or slightly excessive, or slightly in the way of being the kind of person this connection expects you to be. Deuteronomy 13, verse 6 through 8, addresses this in the most direct possible terms, speaking of a person who tries to draw you away from your commitment to God. If thy brother, the son of thy mother, or thy son, or thy daughter, or the wife of thy bosom, or thy friend, which is as thine own soul, entice thee secretly, saying, Let us go and serve other gods, which thou hast not known, thou, nor thy fathers. Namely, of the gods of the people which are round about you. Thou shalt not consent unto him, nor hearken unto him. The person who tries to draw you away from God, even if they are someone you love deeply, someone described here as like your own soul, is not to be followed in that direction. The closeness of the relationship does not override the direction it is pulling you. And when a connection consistently draws you away from God rather than toward Him, that direction is itself a warning that must be taken seriously. The third warning is that a person who consistently takes more than they give, who positions themselves as a consistent receiver of your energy, time, support, and care, while offering very little in genuine return, may not be the kind of connection that God intends for your flourishing. Now, I want to be careful here. Biblical love is not transactional. We are called to give without keeping score. And there are legitimate seasons in any relationship where one person needs more than they can give. But there is a difference between a season of imbalance and a pattern of ongoing consumption. A relationship in which one person consistently invests and the other consistently receives without any genuine reciprocity is not a healthy biblical friendship. It is a form of use. Proverbs 17 verse 17 describes genuine friendship with a specificity that is worth sitting with. A friend loveth at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. A friend loves at all times, not just when it is convenient, not just when they need something, at all times. And a brother, a genuine companion, is born for the season of difficulty. They show up when things are hard. They enter into your adversity rather than disappearing from it. If the person you are investing in consistently disappears when your circumstances become difficult, consistently reappears when they need something, and shows little genuine interest in your life outside of what you can offer them, the pattern is telling you something that the individual moments may be obscuring. The relationship may be a false one. The fourth warning is that a person who speaks differently about you to others than they speak to you directly is operating in deception. And that deception poisons the foundation of any genuine relationship. This is the person who is warm and affirming to your face while being critical or dismissive behind your back, who speaks well of you when they want something from you, and speaks poorly of you when they do not? Who uses information you shared in trust as ammunition in conversations you were never meant to be part of? Proverbs 26, verse 24 and 25 names this dynamic with a directness that is almost jarring. He that hateth dissembleth with his lips, and layeth up deceit within him. When he speaketh fair, hear him not, for there are 7 abominations in his heart. When he speaketh fair, hear him not. This is the person whose pleasant words and whose inward reality are 2 entirely different things. And God is saying, when you encounter that gap, do not be taken in by the pleasant words. What lives inside a person, the 7 abominations in the heart described here, is what is real. And the relationship built on a pleasant surface that conceals a contrary interior is not a genuine connection. It is a performance. And living inside someone else's performance, receiving the version of themselves they have constructed for your benefit, while the real person operates somewhere you cannot see, is one of the most disorienting experiences a human being can have. The 5th warning is that a person who consistently flatters you but never truly challenges or corrects you may not have your genuine good at heart. This is one of the most counterintuitive warnings, because flattery feels good. Approval feels good. Being consistently affirmed and praised feels like love. But genuine love, biblical love, does not simply make you feel good. It tells you the truth. It cares enough about your actual well-being to say the hard thing when the hard thing needs to be said. Proverbs 27 verse 6 says, "Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful." The wounds of a genuine friend are faithful. They come from a place of genuine care. They may hurt, but they heal. They may be uncomfortable, but they produce growth. The kisses of an enemy are deceitful. The approval and the affirmation that comes from someone who does not truly have your good at heart is not love. It is a strategy. And the person who only ever flatters you, who never speaks truth that costs them anything, who keeps you feeling good about yourself in ways that require no honesty and no courage on their part. That person may be cultivating your trust for purposes that are not in your best interest. The 6th warning is that a person who creates confusion, anxiety, or a consistent sense of guilt in you without clear cause may be operating in a way that is damaging your spirit in ways that are difficult to name, but are nonetheless real. This is one of the subtler warnings, and it requires a kind of honest inner examination to recognize. Because sometimes the discomfort we feel in a relationship is a sign that we need to grow. Sometimes the conviction we experience is genuine, but there is a different kind of discomfort, the kind that does not point toward God or toward growth, the kind that simply leaves you feeling less than, uncertain, somehow at fault for things you cannot quite identify, vaguely anxious in this person's presence in ways you cannot fully explain. Romans 8 verse 6 gives us a contrast that is useful here. For to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace. Life and peace. The spiritual, the genuinely of God, produces life and peace. Not a false peace that ignores real issues, but a genuine peace that comes from being in the right place, with the right people, moving in the right direction. And when a relationship consistently produces the opposite, when it consistently leaves you feeling spiritually drained, anxious, confused, or smaller than who God says you are, that is information, not proof that the relationship is false, but a signal worth paying serious attention to. The 7th warning is the most important of all, and it is this: a relationship that leads you to doubt the truth of who God says you are, that uses your vulnerabilities against you, that makes your faith feel like a liability rather than a foundation, is a relationship that is operating against your eternal well-being. And God calls His people to recognize and respond to that kind of connection with courage and wisdom, not with passive endurance in the name of a tolerance that He never required. 2 Timothy 3 verses 6 and 7 describes a pattern of false connection with a precision that is striking. For of this sort are they which creep into houses, and lead captive silly women laden with sins, led away with divers lusts, ever learning, and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. Lead captive, led away. Ever learning, but never coming to the knowledge of the truth. The false connection that God is warning about here is one that keeps a person in a state of perpetual movement without genuine arrival. That introduces enough truth to create credibility, while withholding the full truth that would set the person genuinely free. That keeps the person engaged and dependent, rather than growing and flourishing. And the God who designed you for freedom and growth and genuine truth is grieved by every connection that keeps his people in that kind of captivity. So what do you do with these warnings? Not with paranoia, not with the suspicious posture that treats every difficult relationship as a false one, but with the wisdom and the discernment that God calls his people to exercise. First, bring the relationship before God honestly. Tell him what you are observing. Ask him to show you what is real and what is not. Ask him to give you the clarity to see clearly without the distortion of hope or fear. Psalm 139, verses 23 and 24 is exactly the prayer for this moment. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there be any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. Ask God to search not just the relationship, but your own heart. Because sometimes we hold on to false connections not out of ignorance, but out of a need that the false connection has been meeting, however imperfectly. And understanding what that need is and bringing it honestly to God is the beginning of freedom. Second, bring the observations to the light of wise counsel, not gossip. Not venting to anyone who will listen, but genuine, trustworthy, spiritually mature counsel from someone who can help you see what you are observing clearly, without the distortion of being inside the relationship yourself. Proverbs 15 verse 22 says, "Without counsel, purposes are disappointed, but in the multitude of counselors, they are established." Wise counsel does not just help you see the relationship more clearly, it helps you understand what God may be asking you to do in response to what you see. And third, if God is calling you to create distance from a false connection, do it with grace, not with anger or bitterness or the desire to retaliate for what the false connection cost you, but with the dignity and the peace that comes from acting out of obedience to God rather than out of hurt. Because the goal is not to wound the person who wounded you. The goal is to protect what God has placed in you and to move in the direction he is calling you. And that movement, however painful, however costly, is ultimately towards something better, toward the genuine connections that God has prepared for people who have learned to guard their hearts with wisdom and to release what is false with grace. Jeremiah 29 verse 11 was not spoken to people who had everything together. It was spoken to people in exile, people who had been in situations that were not what they should have been, and who needed to hear that God had not given up on their future. "For I know the thoughts that I think toward you, saith the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you an expected end." An expected end, a future, a hope. The false connection that has drained your trust and tested your faith has not canceled God's plan for your life. It has not used up the goodness he intended for you. It has not disqualified you from the genuine connections that are still ahead. He knows the thoughts he thinks toward you. They are thoughts of peace, and the expected end he has prepared is still waiting, still real, still entirely within his power to bring to pass. You were not made for false connections. You were made for the kind of genuine, truth-telling, faithful, life-giving community that reflects the very character of the God who made you. And the warning he gives about false connections is not a reason to close your heart. It is a reason to guard it, to protect it, to hold it with the kind of careful, prayerful discernment that keeps it open to the real thing while closing it to the counterfeit. That is the life God is calling you to. and He will give you every tool you need to walk in it. Beginning with the 7 warnings we looked at today, I want to close by speaking to the person who is reading this and feeling a familiar weight settle in as they recognize their situation in these warnings. The person who has been sensing for some time that something is not right, but who has been finding reasons to dismiss that sense, to rationalize the behavior they have observed, to tell themselves that they must be misreading the situation, or that they are being uncharitable, or that if they were a better Christian, they would simply extend more grace and press on. To that person, I want to say something carefully and directly. Discernment is not the opposite of love. Wisdom is not the enemy of grace. Recognizing that a connection is false is not an act of judgment against another person. It is an act of stewardship over the life and the heart that God has entrusted to you. And the God who calls you to love your neighbor also calls you to keep your heart with diligence. Those 2 calls are not in conflict. They coexist in the wisdom of a God who knows that you cannot pour genuine love into the world from an empty or a wounded place. The person who guards their heart wisely is not a person who loves less. They are a person who loves from a fuller and healthier and more sustainable place. And the discernment that helps them recognize what belongs in the deepest places of their inner life and what does not is not a failure of love. It is one of the most important forms of wisdom that God gives to His people. Philippians 1, verse 9 and 10 contains one of the most beautiful prayers in all of Paul's letters. And it is specifically a prayer for this kind of discernment. And this I pray, that your love may abound yet more and more in knowledge and in all judgment, that ye may approve things that are excellent, and that ye may be sincere and without offense till the day of Christ, that your love may abound in knowledge and judgment. Paul is not praying for a love that is blind. He is praying for a love that is wise, a love that abounds, that is generous and full and genuine, and that operates in knowledge and judgment, in discernment, in the capacity to distinguish between what is excellent and what is not, between what is genuine and what is false, between what belongs in the deepest places of your heart and what should be kept at a different distance. That is the kind of love God is calling you to. Not the suspicious love that trusts no one, not the naive love that trusts everyone equally, regardless of what their fruit reveals, but the discerning love that grows in wisdom as it grows in devotion, that loves genuinely and abundantly, and also guards wisely and carefully, that gives freely and also receives only what is genuine in return. That is the love of someone who knows who they are in God and who guards what He has invested in them with the care that investment deserves. You are not too wounded by a false connection to experience genuine ones. You are not too damaged by deception to trust again. You are not required to carry the weight of a relationship that was built on a foundation that was never real. And the God who warned you, who placed within you the very discernment that has been whispering that something is not right, that God is also the one who will lead you forward from this place, into the genuine connections, the real community, the authentic love that He has always intended for your life. Trust the warning, guard your heart, and let God lead you toward what is real.